Our next guest not only creates some of our favorite podcasts, they also turn them into successful TV shows. Welcome to the South by Southwest studio, Alix, Jaffe, Lisa Ammerman, and Candice DeLong. There's like an infatuation with podcasts, right? Like I recently just started getting into podcasting myself, movie podcasts and things like that, but turning them into successful TV shows is a whole nother beast entirely. So Candice, can you tell us about the new podcast, Natural Selection: Scott versus Wild Bill?
It is a truly fascinating true crime story of a con man, a killer con man, who got caught and decided to pull an innocent person that he had a grudge against, I think, pull him into the whole mess of it all.
Oh my gosh, that scares me because I'm an innocent person. So, you know,
Right.
that
Right.
just kind of like goes off the rails like really, really quickly. So Alix, how will this documentary and scripted series differ when you expand it upon the podcast? Like how would that work?
So what we're doing, which is kind of a unique business model, I work for Village Roadshow. I oversee scripted TV. We work with Treefort Media. We have a partnership. So when this story came our way, it was sort of pitched to us as a potential TV show, scripted show. But it was sort of just the bare bones of, you know, what happened to Scott Makeda and his interaction with this con man, Wild Bill, in this expat community in Panama. And we saw an opportunity to create our own IP and, you know, work with Treefort and make a podcast, you know, with the intention of then taking that and using that to develop a scripted TV show. So that's, I think, a very unique model, and I haven't seen it done before. And so, you know, as partners, we co-finance the podcast, which will be released later this spring. And then we will use that kind of as a roadmap for a writer to develop a scripted series. And then my colleague on the unscripted side of our company is developing a docuseries. So we're going to have this story told in many different formats and focusing on different angles of the incident.
That's incredible. Wow. And like, I love what you just said about like, it's something that you've never seen done before. And I feel like as creators, we always try to strive to do something that we haven't seen and things that we want to see. And that's really, really cool. But like, when we talk about the state of the kind of like podcast industry, like we've noticed a big retrenching of like companies like Spotify and Sony, and there's been like a lot of layoffs when it comes to those companies. Like, where do you see the state of the industry today, like as a result of that, and do you still see it as lucrative?
I'm going to defer to my my partner and expert on podcasting, Lisa.
Thank you. I would say, I mean, we're very bullish on audio. I think that it's been written about actually relatively recently that listenership is continuing to grow. Advertising is coming back. I think that it was a necessary sort of like correction in the industry. I think there was just a glut of podcasts, and discoverability is still an issue. So I think, you know, the strong survive. Spotify obviously has amazing stuff, you know. Audible, they do amazing stuff. I mean, you know, there's a really, really, I think, compelling content out there, new stuff dropping every couple of hours, really, it feels like. And so I think all of us in audio still remain very bullish on the medium. It's a great way to sort of be entertained and learn something new and share. I mean, it's instantaneous. Like if I come across something, I'm like, literally, I just text it to her, everybody, you know, and it's like instantaneous. Whereas with television, you know, oftentimes you're like, don't forget Friday night, 9 p.m., you know, so it's still, I think that medium and that immediacy, I think, is what people are also embracing still.
Absolutely. It's a medium like we talked about at the top of this. It's so popular, and I feel like it's ingrained into our culture of like you're on the drive and you'll always have your favorite podcast to like turn to, right? But when it comes to like industries like television and movies, like the source materials are always like books or, you know, memoirs or life stories and things of that sort. But podcasting, you know, basing it off of those is a whole new thing. So like, why do you think podcasts are such like a fertile ground to like adapt into like TV series and things like that? Lisa, I want to keep it to you because you're the expert on it. So I want to.
Although she's the one adapting, but I can start. I mean, you know, again, sort of building on what Alix was saying earlier. this sort of like, strategic relationship that we have formed, our two companies, is really so interesting because oftentimes the television series basically comes after the podcast has already come out and found an audience. And instead, we've decided to sort of turn that on its head and say, we're actually going to do these concurrently and build the audience, and you're harnessing sort of all the research, the expertise of somebody like Candice, which in this case has added such a different layer because it's not just a retelling of a story that can be adapted into a documentary or a scripted series. We've got an FBI criminal profiler who is giving us this unbelievable analysis and insight into some diabolical minds. Am I right, Candice?
You're right.
See, now I want to like dive into I feel like that's a whole nother like thing right here where we could talk about like your career is like that. But like to stay on this one, Alix, what are some like unique challenges and opportunities that come with like adapting a podcast into like film or TV?
I mean, look, and you mentioned, I think, or as Lisa mentioned, traditionally it's like once something hits, then everybody goes after it, and we're sort of doing it backwards. Like, we want to create this podcast and sort of just bank on the fact that we think it's a great story. It's a story, yes, there's a Jeffrey Dahmer series. There's so much Jeffrey Dahmer content out there, and people know that story. But to us, this was unique because people don't know about it. We found it just had great characters. So, from a scripted perspective, it just seemed like we have two amazing roles that are, we like to call them actor bait. Right. And so for us, we're just really kind of betting on the fact that we all find it fascinating and that there's opportunity in all these different mediums without having like a proven hit or a story that we know IP that everybody is aware of already.
Yeah, it's just finding the right story, right? And I feel like, whenever you're adapting something or just creating something from scratch, it's like, one, what do you want to hear? Two, like, the people don't know what they want until they see it. And so you're kind of like the gatekeepers of, this is going to be really good. Let's like adapt something like this and let's like go for it. Lisa, like how do you approach expanding like the often like episodic and conversational formats of these things and then putting them into like a scripted series?
I mean, in our case, I think for this one, building on what Alix said, I mean, we had these compelling characters. We did fresh research, fresh interviews, and we had exclusive access to Scott Makeda, who is one of these, huge sort of, his personality, he's just like fun and like easy to listen to. And then we have a serial killer who is not fun, but he's easy to listen to because his, sort of everything that he's talking about is so unnerving, and the way he says it, and again, pulling in the fact that we have Candice to sort of pull all that stuff together is, I think, a way for us to sort of build it out in scripted, unscripted, and tell a story that's never been told before. I mean, people knew who Wild Bill was, the serial killer, but the fact that he had framed this American businessman was really only known in Panama, despite the fact that both of these guys were American. And so it was this small expat community that was sort of reeling from this news. And then it was front page news in Panama, but the rest of the world has never heard this story. And that was really exciting for audio in particular, because we were able to afford Scott a lot of, I guess, like, we can protect him, and he, even though his name is out there, he still is allowed to have a lot of anonymity because he's, he was able to, he's still in hiding.
Seriously, I'm getting the chills just like.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. Yeah, exactly.
I think you should probably listen to it, everyone, so make sure you check that out.
Yeah.
So now I'm gonna throw this question over to you, Alix. Like, you talked about like, choosing like the right story. Are there any other criteria that go into kind of like choosing what you think people would like when it comes to adapting these stories?
I mean, always, we're always looking for things that feel unique, that we haven't seen before, that, I think the best shows are driven by great characters and people you care about. And I think the unique access we had through Scott Makeda, having this firsthand account of his experience from his point of view, and he's really a relatable guy, kind of moved down to Panama to move to this expat community, retired, kind of the American dream. I'm going to move to this tropical paradise. The dollar goes pretty far down there, and just buy a boat, enjoy, be, with my wife, have this great, and it just took this very horrible turn because he kind of messed with the wrong person. And I think people will identify with him. And as you said, you're, a regular guy, but that I think viewers can relate to him and sort of understand, this horrible kind of fate that and now he's in hiding. And I think that is really compelling in so many ways. So always looking for stories with great characters that just have great twists and turns. I mean, that's what I look for whenever I read a script. I'm always like, am I surprised? Right. Does it make me laugh? Does it make me cry? Like, if I can feel any of those things, I know I have something good.
Okay. Now, I come from like a advertising background, and what we used to do, I feel like this happens in every like corporate setting or creative setting, more like where there's like a board that's like, a bunch of like sticky notes, and there's like, okay, we got this and this and this, and then you start putting things together. Obviously like podcasting is a very audio-based experience. So what are some strategies that you put together when it comes to like adapting it visually? Like it could be like a whiteboard type of thing where you put it on the board and say like, this is what we want it to look like. But how do you go about like employing those strategies and adapting them?
Let's see. I think that we always think of audio as theater of the mind. And so we build out the sonic environment. We sound design even, some of the retelling. So for example, like in the beginning of the series, they're sort of meet cute, not meet cute, between serial killer and businessman on this guy's boat, Scott Makeda's boat. Like, we sort of set that scene with, the sounds of the water, the sound of this motorboat coming up, and, it feels like a television series, but just no picture. Yeah. I think that our sound team is amazing. They really, really have, we've done a lot of stuff in scripted as well. And so they took a lot of the learnings from scripted and put those into the, documentary style, so that, again, you have that theater of the mind.
Okay. From a production standpoint, what economic advantages do like podcasts offer as like a source material for like TV and film adaptations? I saw eyes get wide when I said that.
Yeah.
Seems like a very exciting question.
The cost of producing a podcast is the cost of writing a pilot script that may or may not sell. So if you are to pay a writer to write a script that you're going to go take out to the marketplace, you're kind of taking a risk, and it's a very expensive one. For the same price, essentially, we've produced a full podcast that we can monetize and, at least make our money back and hopefully profit from. And then we own it. So, in a model where you would say, oh, I heard a great podcast, I want to option it and go make it a TV show, then you're paying an option fee, you're bringing on other outside people who are attached to the podcast as producers. So sort of this economic model of like owning your own IP, creating it in a way where you're gonna, get your money back is really kind of a creative way to, build something of value without, taking a big risk.
And I was to say, building on what Alix said too, it also, I think, allows for you to pressure test the story and see if it holds. Like, because we have the idea, and then we, again, there was like the research and the fresh interviews, and sort of sometimes that story took on a life of its own, which we didn't even realize when we first started delving into it, which I think is really exciting too.
And you can see which episodes people are the most interested, or if there are characters that pop, and it's a good way to kind of, as you said, test out the story.
I love the passion for that. Like the way you guys, let's talk, let's really get into
it. That's what makes this project really unique. I mean, in the story in itself is very unique, and I think the fact that people don't know it, but just sort of this model and sort of looking at different forms of media, scripted, unscripted, podcasting, all for one subject matter, I think that's unusual, because usually companies like one arm does this, another arm does that, and they don't talk to each other. So
For sure. Candice, can you offer some like practical advice for people who want to like follow in your footsteps? Like you're in a unique position of like having one type of job and now you're like doing this and it's like pretty incredible. So
Well, thank you. And in regards to this podcast, I offer advice to the listener about red flags. If this problem is coming your way, these will be the red flags, and here's how to handle it, and here's what not to do. Do's and don'ts, because there's something to be learned from pretty much every true crime TV show, movie, or podcast, and how to not be victimized.
Right. How long, like, do people like come up to you like on the street and kind of like pick your brain about these type of things? Because
Not on the street, but if I'm featured somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
what's one of the more interesting like questions you've gotten, like, you know, from your line of work and just like the brain picks that you get? One of the more
The
interesting.
most common question I get is from young women that want to be FBI profiler. And the second most common question I get is, how do I sleep at night?
Yeah, and I just love like just your presence and your cadence, because I didn't have the question of why do you sleep at night. So you have one less person in the world asking you that. But I just find it like very fascinating how your expertise kind of like went into the podcasting world. And I'm just very curious, like, did you like listen to like, do you have any other favorite podcasts that kind of like led you into doing something like this? Like, what was the journey like that like?
Well, I was asked to do this. Treefort is the production company of a podcast that I did create based on my expertise, explaining the psyche of killers, the motivation, behavior, what drives them.
Okay. And this is a question for everyone, because, you know, there was a big conversation about kind of like true crime thrillers, whether it's in the film, TV, podcasting, the formats. Why do you think there's such a fascination with like that mode of storytelling? The point of Candice.
I get asked, well, people say to me, I love true crime TV shows. I can't get enough. Is there something wrong with me? And
That's a common one right there.
all I can think of was, well, not if you want to go on and live a long and healthy life. There's nothing wrong with you. There is something to be learned from the tragedies other people end up having to deal with because a criminal got a hold of them. Right. So anything we discuss in any of these true crime podcasts, I mean, what we're discussing now with Scott Makeda, it could happen to you. It could happen to anyone. And we like to think we're savvy and immune, and con men and con women have no chance with us. Well, you'd be wrong. Yeah. You know, they are usually terribly smart, crafty. They have to be successful. In Bill's case, he ended up actually not so successful because he's in prison for a long time. But a lot of people that commit crimes like this never get caught.
I love how you just stopped with the pause there. Let that sit, you know. But you know what? I'm glad you did that, because I feel like the merit in the like watching and consuming and, you know, just listening to these type of stories is you realize just what humanity is capable of, and by knowing what they're capable of, you can kind of like in a way prepare for it, like know like what's going on. So again, like going back to I like these type of things. Am I crazy? It's kind of like, not if you're using it as like a learning tool. In
But
these type of
I do
situations,
think
right?
people, you know, we found, because we were talking about unsolved cases, people like true crime because you get the bad guy. And I think there's some sort of closure and sense of peace, and that's stories where in the end, the bad guy, like that, I do find, and especially if it's a true story, I think that makes people feel safe and gives
There's
them
happy
peace of
endings
mind.
in real life as well.
Exactly.
I love
Even
that.
with tragedy, the bad guy will, you know, kind of get caught. I think that's what people sort of cling to, and that's why procedural shows, and I worked, you know, at CBS for a long time, and people love a procedural because at the end of the episode, they always find out who did it, and the bad guy goes, gets put away, and that's what people enjoy.
You just made me feel so much better. We get so easy to go dark into it, but then we just got back up to the light.
Exactly.
And I think that just like a happy ending, we can like end this conversation at the studio. Thank you so much for coming by. This was
Thank you for
incredible.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. You can watch this interview and all of our studio interviews on the South by Southwest page on YouTube. That's youtube.com/SXSW. I'm your host, Juju Green. Thank you so much for watching. This was really great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.